Okay, so to begin, I'd like to start with a little bit of a reading from Khalil Gibran's The Prophet. And this particular section is on work. He says, "You've been told that life is darkness, and in your weariness you echo what was said by the weary. And I say that life is indeed darkness, save where there's urge. And all urge is blind, save where there's knowledge. And all knowledge is vain, save where there's work. And all work is empty, save where there's love. And when you work with love, you bind yourself to yourself and to one another and to God." And what is it to work with love? It is to weave the cloth with threads drawn from your own heart, even as if your beloved were to wear that cloth. It is to build a house with affection, even as if your beloved were to dwell in that house. It is to sow seeds with tenderness and reap the harvest with joy, even as if your beloved were to eat of the fruit. It is to charge all things you fashion with a breath of your own spirit. So, for those of you who are just joining us for the first time, we are in the midst of talking about the Four Noble Truths. It's been a many week-long journey. We still have a few weeks to go. So I'd like to spend just a little bit of time reviewing so that what I talk about today is in context. So basically, and for those of you who've heard this before, it's probably worth hearing again, but I apologize if it feels repetitive. The first idea is that the purpose of the Four Noble Truths, which is the Buddha's first teaching, is to help people move beyond the experience of dukkha. And again, dukkha is often described as suffering. It's described as stress. It's described as unsatisfactoriness. The literal definition of dukkha is the ill-fitting axle of a cart. So you get the idea that this is a kind of bumpy ride. There's ups, there's downs, there's ups and downs. We're constantly holding on, trying to make sure we're going to be okay. That's what we're talking about with dukkha. And the Buddha says we can move beyond that experience. And the First Noble Truth says that in order to begin to move beyond dukkha, we have to bring it into conscious awareness. We have to not just kind of push it down, ignore it. We have to let it bubble up. And we do it with mindfulness. We do it with the two wings of mindfulness. One wing of mindfulness is noticing, the body's tight. The emotions are a little upset. The mind is contracted. And the second wing of mindfulness is a sense of allowing. Can I let it be okay? Instead of saying, oh, my body's tight. This is bad. I don't like it. It becomes, oh, my body's tight. Yeah, that's uncomfortable, but can I be with it? Can I get calm in its presence? Can I let it be okay so that I can start to get to know it? The second noble truth basically says that the cause of dukkha is that we cling. We cling to all sorts of worldly experiences. We cling to comfort. We cling to security. We cling to status. We cling to our relationships being a certain way. We cling to our beliefs. We cling to youth. We cling to health. We cling to these bodies. And ultimately, we cling to a sense of self, a sense of this is who I am. The third noble truth basically says that as we let go of clinging at subtler and subtler and deeper levels, we find that we get more and more freedom, that we experience dukkha less and less and less. ultimately, when we fully let go of this experience of self, this contraction of me against the world, we find that we get an ultimate freedom, a sense of what he calls nibbana. And then the fourth noble truth is basically how we get there, and that's another list. It's called the Eightfold Path. The Eightfold Path is broken up into three parts. There's the wisdom part, there's the ethics part, and then there's the meditation or concentration part. So the wisdom part consists of wise view and wise intention. Wise view consists of, in one way, how do we look at the world? How do we see the world that is skillful? If we can really see the world in this way, we start to let go of grasping almost spontaneously. One way we see the world is to recognize the impermanence of everything that's worldly. We start to realize everything's going to change. Nothing stays the same. And if I try to make it stay the same, I'm only going to suffer. I'm only going to experience dukkha. So there's a letting go of the grasping for things to stay the same. The second way of seeing the world is to recognize the dukkha aspect of all worldly phenomena. And what I mean by that is that there is nothing that can inherently make us happy. Something may bring about some temporary happiness or some temporary joy, but it's not something that's going to last. And if I don't have it within me to experience that sense of inner joy, if you will, nothing outside myself is going to make that happen. Ultimately, it's an inside job. And ultimately, we find that joy not from worldly experiences, but from unworldly experiences that don't change, that just bring about this consistent sense of joy. And the third way to see the world is to recognize that nothing has an inherent sense of self. Everything is empty of self. Now, that's a challenging thing to say. It's easy to just say it, but what does that really mean? And two ways to look at it is that, we can see ourselves as separate. I am me, the world is out there, and I have to protect myself. I have to get everything I need to get, and that will keep me safe. And there is some wisdom in that to some degree, but ultimately what happens for us is when we cultivate that sense of selfing, we feel separate, we feel different, and we feel like we are constantly protecting ourselves. And that in and of itself is a grasping, and there's a dukkha there. To the degree that we can soften that sense of being separate, being solid and different, and start to sense into our inherent interconnectedness, there starts to be a lessening of that experience of dukkha. We stop grasping for a sense of self quite so much. So that's wise view. And then there's wise intention, which is how do we train our minds to think? What thoughts or ways of being do we train our minds for that bring about a greater and greater sense of ease and a greater and greater sense of well-being? And here we train our minds for renunciation, that sense of letting go, of grasping for things being just so. The more we can let go of, I need my body to not ache, or I need my relationships to be a certain way. Whatever it is, the more we let go, the more we find ourselves over time feeling more at ease. So we train ourselves in that direction. Another training, another intention is loving kindness, holding all beings in care. This is the contradiction to aversion. I don't like it. I don't want it. If I can then take something that maybe feels aversive to me and I can hold that in kindness, my relationship to it and to all things to myself change. There's a greater sense of ease that we start to cultivate as we cultivate loving kindness. And the third is cultivating compassion. And here, what we're looking at is a recognition that everyone and everything in a body is suffering. Some may be suffering in one way and some in another way, some to a greater degree and some to a lesser degree. But at some level, there is an interconnectedness. And this helps to dissolve that sense of a separate self. And again, bring us to greater and greater freedom. Okay, so now we're in the process of talking about the ethical qualities. And there are three. We talked about one last week, which was wise speech, to really, really become very much aware of how we're speaking in the world, to not lie, to not speak harshly, to not gossip. We talked about a bunch of others like not complaining, not being sarcastic, all the different ways that we learn to cultivate being kinder in our speech, that our speech is true, that it's kind, helpful, and timely. And we learn as we get more and more mindful, what is the effect of our speech, not only on others, but also on ourselves. The law of karma, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, meaning that if I am causing harm, and I can do that with my speech, to another, I'm causing harm to myself. And recognizing that, the more I start to recognize that, the more I'll start to clean up my speech. The second, which we'll talk about today, is wise action. And the third is wise livelihood, which we're going to skip, but basically kind of enfolded in today's discussion. And just like with wise speech, we watch for our actions. We want our actions to be ones that are non-grasping, right? Renunciation. We want our actions to be those that are kind, non-aversive. We want our actions to be skillful so that they're not harming, so that they're compassionate. So these ethical factors, right? Wise action, wise speech, they're not just moral. They're not just about not harming another. Certainly, that's a major component of it. But what we notice is as we really cultivate over time skillful action, as we practice them, they start to change us. We start letting go of a solid, separate, grasping self that keeps us kind of imprisoned. So many of you have probably seen the movie Groundhog Day. If you haven't seen the movie Groundhog Day, I'll just say briefly what it is. There's a newscaster played by Bill Murray, and he is a pretty sardonic, sarcastic guy, very much looking out for himself, very much grasping for whatever he can get. And he goes to Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania to, watch the groundhog, find out what the groundhog is going to say about whether spring is going to come soon or not. And he goes through the day and, he tries to hit on his producer. She's having none of it. He has all kinds of terrible things happen. He's really complaining and groaning about what's going on. And he goes to sleep, and there's a big snowstorm, so they can't leave. And he goes to sleep that night. And the next morning, it's the same day over again. And that happens day after day after day after day after day. And at first, he continues to try to get whatever he can. He tries to, make things be how he wants them to be. And he gets more and more miserable. And eventually, he tries to kill himself. Even tries to kill the groundhog. None of that works. And he wakes up the next day, and it's another day, and he has to do it again. what he discovers eventually over time is that what saves him is cultivating kind action. He, saves the person falling out of the tree. He knows it's going to happen, so he makes sure he's there, saves the person falling out of the tree. He, finds the person who's really obnoxious, who's trying to sell him insurance, and he deals skillfully with him, holding him in kindness and care. And he does this with every single person, gets to know everybody in the town. And he becomes like the town hero, and he gets changed. And in the end, he finds that he's able to find a true connection with this woman who is his producer, who he comes to really love, but in a non-grasping way. It's as if it didn't matter if anything happened or not. He gets changed by practicing ethical qualities. And most of us have probably noticed that in our lives, that we get changed by that ourselves. So Philip Moffat, in his book about the Four Noble Truths, says, wise action is any action that liberates the mind, moves you towards freedom from suffering, and supports a feeling of well-being that's independent of external conditions. It arises out of clear comprehension, meaning that you're clear about what's needed, what's appropriate, and what's doable within your limitations. Wise action doesn't just apply to big decisions, but it applies to small ones as well. You cultivate being mindful of all your actions, even the ones that you ordinarily don't notice, such as how fast you walk, how you sit at your desk, how you decide what to eat, how fast you eat. Wise action is reflected in how you schedule and pace yourself, how you treat others, and how you nourish yourself. So we can start to see that wise action, just like wise speech, permeates ultimately every aspect of our day-to-day lives. We can be mindful of what we're doing and noticing its effects. And how we perceive our actions matters too. So an inquiring person goes up to three people who are all doing the same task and asks them what they're doing. And the first one says, "Can't you see I'm laying bricks?" He asks the second one, "What are you doing?" And the second person says, "I'm earning my paycheck." He asks the third person, "What are you doing?" And that person says, "I'm building a cathedral." How we view our activities, how we view our actions, and the context greatly determines the care and the spirit with which we take our actions. And this translates to those around us as well, and resonates within ourselves, moving us to greater and greater freedom. Just like the poem by Khalil Gibran, what if we can do all of our actions, all of our work, as if we were doing it for our beloved? Now, the Buddha has 5 precepts that he spoke to for lay people. I'm going to say them now. Maybe you've heard them before. The first is, I undertake the training rule to abstain from harming. The second is, I undertake the training rule to abstain from taking what's not given. The third is, I undertake the training rule to avoid sexual misconduct. The fourth is, I undertake the training rule to abstain from false speech and harsh speech and gossip. And the fifth is, I undertake the training rule to abstain from fermented drink that causes heedlessness. So basically, intoxicants or anything that numbs us out from really being mindful and being present. Now, one of the things to notice here is that the Buddha's code of ethics is not one of guilt and blame. It's not a thou shalt not, thou art sinning in a sense, but rather how to train ourselves. In some way, we're harming all the time. In some way, we are taking what's not given. But we start to cultivate a greater and greater sense of awareness of how we do that unmindfully, without knowing it. And as we start to notice more and more, we start to notice the harm that happens from that, both towards others and towards ourselves. And we start to engage in these practices less and less. We're training ourselves. And as we do, we find ourselves having more freedom, more joy, more lightness. Each of these precepts is a training to release from grasping. Now, these ethical qualities are on a continuum, ranging from what to abstain from all the way to what to cultivate, right? So each of the Buddhist statements are proscriptive, right? They focus on what we should not do, right? We abstain from harming, right? We abstain from taking what's not freely given. But as we develop ethically, we start learning also to act proscriptively, what we should do. In place of non-harming, we start to look at ways that we might protect others from harm, or we might find ways to heal. In place of not stealing or not taking what isn't freely given, we start to practice generosity. And we can keep pushing at the edges, expanding our capacity more and more for ethical qualities throughout our lives, bringing again ever more joy, ever more freedom, ever more of a sense of letting go of clinging to a solid separate self. There's a story that's told about there's a man and a boy, his son, who see a young boy who clearly doesn't have much. And the father tells his son to give that boy one of his toys. And at first, the son goes and tries to find some toy that he doesn't really like anymore and he can easily get rid of. And the father says to the son, no, I want you to pick one of the toys that you really like. And at first, the son is a little bit nervous about it, but he follows his father's advice and he picks out one of the toys that he likes and he goes to the boy and gives it to him. And the father is waiting for his son to return and, getting ready to have the talk about how it's important and what people are experiencing. And the son comes back and he's all jubilant and he says, that was great. Can we do that again? There is an infectiousness. There's something about cultivating more and more skill in pushing at our edges of our ethical qualities that start to break down our sense of separateness that we feel and we can cultivate and move us more and more in the direction of freedom and joy. So I'd like to do a little practice with you all. I'm going to ask you to go ahead and close your eyes for a few moments, bringing your attention to your breathing. And I'll invite you to just kind of check in. Let your inner guidance lead you. Is there some action that I'm habitually taking in some way? Something that might be a little bit unskillful. Maybe I'm harming in some way, even if it's subtly. Harming someone else or harming myself. Maybe it's I'm taking something from others in some way. Again, it might be subtle. Maybe I'm acting inappropriately sexually in some way or speaking in some way that brings harm. Maybe I'm numbing out in some way. Just kind of checking, is there some action that I might begin to practice abstaining from? It might not be simple, it's pushing at the edges, it's a habit. And then you might take a few moments and just imagine yourself almost about to engage and noticing what's going on in your mind and body, finding those signals that get you to pause before you start to take an action that might be unskillful or less skillful than it might be. What is it that you might begin to change? How might you pause, take a breath, perhaps make another choice? And then letting that go. And once again, checking in with your inner guidance about what quality, what action you might take that will be prescriptive, what might be healing of harm or protective of harm, what might be generous, what might be kind. Maybe there's some action that you might take that might be of service during this pandemic. Just kind of sensing in to where's the edge here. Maybe you are that wise, kind being that you worked with at the end of that meditation. And I'll invite you once again to imagine that you're acting in this new way, that you're bringing this kindness or this generosity, or that you're healing a harm or protecting from a harm. And maybe holding now this sense of aspiration of how I might take more and more skillful action. Martha Postlethwaite writes, "Do not try to serve the whole world or do anything grandiose. Instead, create a clearing in the dense forest of your life and wait there patiently until the song that is yours alone to sing falls into your own cupped hands and you recognize it and greet it. Only then will you know how to give yourself to the world so worthy of rescue."